Glad to see you all here. This webinar is with one of our partners, Net Positive Agency. I'm not going to give them a long introduction. They're going to introduce themselves. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our friend at Net Positive, Rudi. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Katja, and thanks again for inviting us to present our webinar today on how to win media coverage for startups. Steve, could you put the slides up? Okay, while we're waiting for the slides to load, just a quick introduction then. So, as you guys saw on the invite, today's webinar is going to be about how to win media coverage for your startup. I wanted this to be more practical than theoretical. So the idea was once you've watched this webinar today, there'll be some immediate actionable steps you can take to start winning media coverage rather than talking more about the kind of theoretical nature of PR. So as we go along, you'll kind of see those steps that we talk you through. Steve, can I have the next slide, please? So I'm Rudi Davis, and I'm the VP of Operations at Net Positive Agency. We're a digital PR and marketing agency that specializes in helping startups and small businesses to build their exposure and grow. You can learn more about us at netpositiveagency.com. And once again, I would like to say thanks to MIT Enterprise Forum for inviting us on to host this webinar today. Just before I get going, a couple of points of order. So firstly, we're recording this webinar and we're going to send out the recording afterwards to all the attendees. So if there's anything you missed when we go through this in live, you'll get another chance to watch it when we send out the recording. And also, please ask any questions you got as I work through the webinar. And then at the end of the presentation, Katja is going to host the Q&A with me. So if you've got any questions about what I go through, about PR in general, about marketing for your startup, now's your chance to ask them, and I'll be going through all of those at the end. Steve, got the next slide, please. So here's what we'll be covering during the webinar. So firstly, a little bit of theory. I'll keep this brief, but it's important just to clarify like a couple of important rules when it comes to PR, particularly PR for startups that you should be aware of. Then we'll touch on kind of what you need to do to get your house in order before you start engaging in PR. Then we'll kind of get into the practical steps that you guys can kind of leave this webinar with. So the first one is press releases, what they are, when you use them, and kind of how to write one and how to send them out. Then I'll talk about guest post pitching for beginners and how you can leverage this technique to win top-tier media coverage. Then we'll be looking at responding to journalist requests, the platforms you can use to get hooked up to journalists looking for sources, and how you can start leveraging that right away for media coverage. Then we'll look at media monitoring, the different software that's available to do that, and how you can, without that much effort, start building relationships with journalists so you can become a source for any stories they're writing in your niche. And then we'll touch on a little bit just about cold pitching and the do's and don'ts when you just send out some speculative pitches to journalists. And then, as we've said at the end, there'll be the Q&A session. So once again, please ask any questions you've got in the webinar chat as we go along. So Steve, the next slide, please. So first, for a little bit of theory, just so you can kind of get a good grounding in PR before we start on the practical steps. So the next slide, please, Steve. So for many people, when they think about PR, and we find this a lot with the clients that we work with, they immediately think about press releases. While press releases still undoubtedly serve a function for PR, like the broad spectrum of PR goes way beyond this. And in many cases, a press release just isn't worth the time or the effort to write. So golden rule number one is that PR is not just about press releases. And the next slide, please, Steve. So this is especially the case with startups, because startups have a few kind of specific problems that bigger businesses don't have when it comes to PR. So the main problem that startups have, and this is where you need to be more creative, and kind of PR for startups is also a niche in itself in the PR industry, is that the average startup, they don't have that many genuinely newsworthy announcements to make in any one year. You might have one or two pieces of news that you could spin out into a press release, but then you've got to find other ways that you can win media coverage, during those quiet periods when you don't have a big product launch or you don't have a funding announcement to make. You've also got the problem as well of low name recognition and social proof. So for the likes of Apple, Uber, Slack, the titans of tech, they can put out a press release about any update or any change in their business, and that will get multiple coverage. But for your average startup, that's very different. And a lot of the press releases that some startups try to do without having too much of a grounding in PR, they find there's no ROI because there just simply isn't the name recognition or the social proof for what's being announced to kind of have any relevancy to the publications that it's being sent to. The other problems we got here is limited resource, obviously. So you, as a startup, you don't want to be wasting your time with a technique such as press releases. If it takes you half a day to write, another half a day to find the sources to send it to, you then find that was a wasted effort because of the reasons we talked about up top. And then just lack of experience in media relations as well. So this is another difficult thing which we'll touch on in a moment about kind of the ways you should approach media and pitch who it is you are and your product versus the ways that you shouldn't do and some of the common traps that startups can fall into. So the next slide, please, Steve. So golden rule number 2, and this is perhaps the hardest to swallow, but unfortunately it's a reality. Most journalists don't really care about your product. After all, it's the job of journalists to write stories, not to advertise your products. If you have a truly innovative product, then you'll certainly be able to win some media coverage if you pitch it to the right publications. But the chances are you might get a mild flurry of media coverage to begin with that kind of focuses on like something particularly innovative that you're doing. Once you've got that media coverage, it's very hard to replicate that using the same technique. And furthermore, the quickest way to get a journalist to add you to their spam filter is by sending them endless pictures about how disruptive your product is. These guys get hundreds of these pictures a week. It's just adding more noise to their inbox. So as founders and people working in startups, it's great that we're all enthusiastic about our products and we believe in them, but you need to adjust your tone and be conscious of this when you're reaching out to media and trying to get media coverage for your business. And then the next slide, please, Steve. So this brings us nicely onto golden rule number 3. And to paraphrase a certain someone, ask not what a journalist can do for you, ask what you can do for a journalist. And by this, we mean you always need to approach every pitch in terms of the value that pitch is providing to the journalist. And if you can't provide any value in that pitch that you're sending to a journalist, if you're just plugging your product, for example, then don't send the pitch because a journalist is not going to be interested. They're always interested in what's in it for them. And that's how you need to think about every pitch that you send to a journalist. And the next slide, please, Steve. So those are the three kind of golden rules of startup PR, at least the way we set up our stall and help clients at Net Positive Agency. So before we start talking about, okay, the steps you can actually do to start winning PR, as of this week, is just taking a step back and thinking about getting your house in order before you start that activity. So if we go on to the next slide, Steve, there's a couple of points there. So we would split that into 3 areas when we're kind of doing our initial kind of due diligence with clients that we first start working with. So we want to check out website, social media, and branding. And we kind of call this the Sniff Test to make sure that when a journalist receives a pitch, you trigger interest, they then click through on a link to either your website or your LinkedIn. There's the right signals on there, and it's going to kind of pass their very basic due diligence they would do in a couple of minutes to make sure the person pitching to them is legit and the business looks legit. So the areas that you need to hit before you start reaching out to journalists. So first up with your website. So you kind of want to be appearing page 1 of Google for brand search terms. Don't necessarily need to be top of Google, but if a journalist just types in your business name, you want them to be easily able to find you without scrolling onto the second, third page of Google. If you need to do that, that's going to set alarm bells ringing. The site should be free of errors. There should be no broken links. There should be no Latin lorem ipsum filler text anywhere. And you also need to have a completed about us and team pages, as they're often going to click on that as the first thing they click on to see who it is that's working there and what the social proof of the business is. In terms of social media, just make sure your profiles are up to date. Your team's LinkedIn profiles are all up to date, show that they're working there, show what it is they do at the business. And if you're working in tech, have a Crunchbase profile set up as well, because a lot of journalists will just check you out on that platform to get more of a kind of third-party assessment of who it is that you are. And in terms of branding, before you start PR, you want to kind of have at least formalized the basis of your brands. A good professional logo, a consistent color scheme. You want your tone of voice to be consistent, the kind of who you are language on your social media and your website to be consistent, your mission and vision to be clearly stated, and kind of bonus if you have a media kit as well, which can provide just a bit more meat to the bone when journalists come on to check out your site. So next slide, Steve. So once you've gone through that, you tick those boxes, you think you're in a ready state in terms of your brand, your tone of voice, your website, your social media profiles, your team pages, then you're good to go. You're ready to start leveraging PR techniques. So I'm going to go through 5 techniques in this webinar, and each of them, it doesn't really take years of experience in PR to begin doing this. It just takes a little bit of research, a bit of time to write the content, to pitch it out, and anyone can really start doing this. So technique number 1 is when and how to use press releases. So the thorny issue of the press release, as discussed in the previous section, this shouldn't be your automatic go-to technique for winning media coverage. But having said that, there are still certain circumstances where it's worth the time and effort to put one together. So the next slide, Steve, will show those. So it's just kind of in broad terms a few do's and don'ts when it comes to assessing if what it is that you're announcing about your business is kind of worthy of putting out on a press release and then sending out. So a couple of examples of when you'd probably want to do this. So one is your launch announcement, but I would caveat that with if you can demonstrate some kind of social proof. And by that we mean is one of the founders an experienced startup founder? Have they got experience scaling other startups? Have you had some significant investment? Have you been through a very notable accelerator? Like all those types of things give you social proof that you can leverage in your press release to make it clear to a journalist, why are you launching, why are you existing matters. A few other things that are always good to send out press releases for: some major funding announcement. There's no clear rule as to what's major, what's minor. It'll kind of be what the averages are in your industry. If you're at or above that average, then that's definitely good to talk about in a press release. If you've landed a major partnership with, say, a blue chip company, a huge tech company, a huge legacy company, that's always good to talk about. New product release, if it's something genuinely new, if it's not just a slight release of an update of an old product, but if it's the whole new product that you're launching and you already have a bit of a foothold in the industry, then again, you want to communicate that with a press release. And perhaps major award win. If it's a legitimately big award that you've won that's known in the industry, then that might be something else you want to send out in a press release. Some of the times that you don't want to send out a press release, and we see this quite a bit just across numerous industries. So one is if you're just plugging a promotion, if you're offering a couple of months free for your platform because of the coronavirus, for example, that's not a press release. The press don't care about that. That's marketing. But we see that a lot. Really, that is something that should not be in a press release, because unless you pay to get that posted somewhere, a journalist is not going to be interested in writing about that. Same as minor product updates. A small event which only really has interest within a very small community. Thin research findings that companies try and dress up as something kind of insightful, which again, journalists can see through very quick. Or perhaps winning kind of unrecognized awards that don't have name recognition as well is something that the journalists aren't really going to be interested in. That's not the ultimate list. Kind of comes down to how well you know your industry, the types of things that are being reported in your industry. But as a starter, that's how I would address deciding in your business, okay, this thing's happened, we've got this announcement, is it worth sending out as a press release or not? And that can kind of help guide that decision as to whether it's a yes or a no. And the next slide, Steve. So for instances where you decided, okay, we've got an announcement and we think it's worthy of a press release, we think what it is we're announcing is going to be of interest to journalists, you then need to develop an angle before you start writing it. It's no good at just saying you're launching a new product. The product is going to be available from this date and it costs this much money. You need to link it into some sort of angle and explain why this matters to journalists that are going to report on it. So some common angles that you can report on. So solving a problem is probably the most common thing that press releases are angled around. So does what you're announcing solve a known problem in your industry? Addressing a need. Does what you're announcing address a clear need within the market that you can back up with data points? Progressing towards a goal. Does it help you or the industry or an organization you're working with progress towards a notable or worthy goal? Has it helped you achieve a goal? Something of value, something of wider value to the business community that you're in, not just your own business, or providing new insights, challenging orthodoxy. Have you stumbled upon this finding? Does your data suddenly tell you something that's never been reported before? Those types of stories also have interest as well. So once you've decided on your angle, and the next slide, Steve, it's then the case of writing the press release. So press releases, they follow a pretty standard format in any kind of PR company. And it goes something like the infographic on the screen here. So you've got your headline, keep it short, summarize, who you are, what the announcement is. Have a subheading underneath that gives like a bit more information that should say why it matters. And then when you get into the actual body of the press release, you always start it off with the date and location. First paragraph, who, what, when, where, why, just the summary of what it is you're announcing. Then you expand on the detail in the next paragraph. Paragraph after that, you want to build your hook. You want to put a couple of data points to other reputable sources you found that supports that hook that you built for your press release, that shows the reader why it matters to them. Then you want to put a quote from the founder, the CEO, someone relevant at the business. This is the only part of the press release where you speak in your own words in the first person. And that just basically reinforces the narrative of the piece, but in your own words, followed by the boilerplate and contact details at the end. A couple of rules of a press release: keep it brief. If it goes over a page in a Google Doc of a normal font size, you've written too much. A journalist is not interested in reading more than a page. It's always written in the third person, and avoid superlatives or very subjective language. It should be an objective statement of fact that's tied into a narrative, and that has one quote where you can write in the first person your objective feelings about it. The next slide, Steve. So once you've written your press release, the next job is getting it out there. And there's two ways you can send a press release out to the press. So one is using like a newswire or a PR newswire service. And there's quite a lot of them out there. The screenshot here on the left is Cision. They're probably the market leaders. And you just upload your press release onto the platform, and they'll then distribute it and syndicate it to however many news outlets they've got in their network. The problem with these platforms, they're very expensive. I think Cision, some of their packages, it's about $1,000 for every press release you send out, which is often not very scalable for startups that are trying to bootstrap their own PR. And also, they kind of go for quantity over quality. So they'll advertise that they can get your press release syndicated and published in all of these media outlets. But it might be the case that those media outlets are just completely irrelevant to you because you're in a very niche industry and your target market are just not going to be reading those outlets. So I would say for the majority of startups, a press release distribution service like Cision probably isn't the best way to go and is going to be very expensive as well. So the other alternative is just direct sending. So you will know the publications in your niche. Then a lot of those publications, particularly smaller ones, they will advertise on their website press release submissions. So the example here, Crowdfund Insider, which is a fintech publication, this is their submit a press release page where you can just copy and paste your press release or upload the doc, and they'll then review it. And if it's relevant to the niche, they'll publish it. Now, this can take a bit of time. Say if your niche has 20 to 30 publications and you want to send your press release to each of those publications, you've got to find all those publications. You've got to find the submit press release page. Some of them won't have it, so you need to find editorial contact details, send a cover email, send it off. You can, and this is kind of something that is leveraged by a lot of startups and a lot of small agencies is places like Fiverr or Upwork are great for this kind of data processing admin tasks. You can get a freelancer on Upwork, $20, $30, who can scrape 30, 40 publications that are relevant to your niche, along with contact details, saves you the job of doing it. Once you've done that, create a mail merge of your press release, and then in one shot, you can send it out to all of those publications that are relevant to your niche at that kind of barely any cost versus a platform like Cision. And a couple of points to add to that. Be wary of some sites that charge for press releases. So generally, a site that's maybe slightly kind of less known in the industry is maybe like more of a kind of content farm than a site of real value to the industry. They might ask a press release fee, as that's one of their revenue streams. That can be anything from $30 to a few $100s. It's kind of your call if you want to pay that money. I always think that if a site is legitimate and it's respected in the industry, they generally won't ask for a fee to publish a press release. So for me, it's generally a red flag if a site asks for money to publish it. So I would always go for kind of known sites where they have the easy submit press release function. That's a very good way to get press straight off the bat if you have something that's newsworthy to announce. Next slide, Steve. So the next technique is guest post pitching for beginners. And I would say that guest post pitching is probably the best PR technique when it comes to winning media coverage, particularly in top tier publications as well. We go to the next slide, Steve. So firstly, to confirm exactly what a press release is, this is sometimes, or some confusion when it comes to some of the startups that we work with. So a guest article is essentially an article that you write on a subject you're an expert on, which is then published under your own name in a publication. And pretty much all major publications across all industries accept guest post pitches, as it's free content for them, as it's authored by experts. And there's just a few examples on this slide that I found yesterday when I was looking through just some major sites in startup or entrepreneur world. So Forbes, TechCrunch, the Next Web. So whenever there's an article and next to the journalist or the writer's name, it says contributor, then that has most probably been written by a founder or a CEO or somebody else at a startup or a company or an organization. And then when you really start looking at that on sites like Forbes, Entrepreneur, the Next Web, you'll be amazed at just how much of their content is written by contributors. It's a huge amount of content, which is good for anyone that wants to get into it, because there's so much supply of media outlets out there that are looking for good quality articles to publish under your own name. Next slide, Steve. So the guest posting golden rule is that all articles must be non-promotional. It can't just be a sales pitch for your products. That's something else. That is what native advertising is. That's when you pay a fee to a publication for them to publish a promotional article that you've written, and it clearly says at the top, sponsored content or native advertising. That is not what guest posting is. Guest posting is free to get published. Any reputable publication will not ask for a fee to publish a guest post, because you're providing advice and insight as your position as an expert based on the subject matter that you're an expert on. Next slide, Steve. So if a guest post can't be promotional, if you can't plug your own product, then a question we get asked a lot is, well, what's the point in guest posting if I can't promote my own products? Well, what it can't be explicitly promotional, there are still plenty of benefits to why lots of people engage in guest posting. So first off, it builds your social proof. If you're getting featured in Forbes, if you're getting featured in the Next Web, if you're getting featured in TechCrunch, that obviously really helps to build your legitimacy in the eyes of people like investors or potential clients. It can also build and develop your thought leadership, which can help open doors in your industry, such as like conference speaking, invitations, new partnerships, trade association membership, all of those type of things that once you start to build your profile can then start coming your way. It's also I come from a background in SEO, so I know that guest posting is probably one of the best ways these days to get good quality backlinks coming back into your website. Most publications that you can guest post on will still provide a backlink to your website. If you get a couple of a couple of articles published on publications like the Next Web or TechCrunch, Huffington Post, you get backlinks from those websites coming into your website. That gives you an immediate SEO benefit without even investing in SEO, just because you're doing PR work. And lastly, and while you can't just plug your products in a guest post, you can still build a narrative that's beneficial to your product or beneficial to your business. You can raise awareness in your industry of problems that may not be that well known, of issues that may not be that well known, which your product ultimately solves the problem of. And readers can put two and two together when they're reading this and they read your bio. You can still get a lot of click-throughs and a lot of referrals from these articles that you write coming into your website of potential clients that are going to be interested in your products. Next slide, Steve. So in terms of how you action that process as the start guest post pitching, there's kind of 3 steps to this. So step 1 is research the media landscape. So you want to find publications in your niche that accept guest posts. You can do this manually by just coming up with a list of publications that you already read, going onto each site within the contact us section, or maybe in its own guest posting section. Most sites will provide a page or guidance on how you go about pitching to them and the way to do that. Again, that can be time consuming. You may not have half a day to do that, or a day to look into other websites. So again, a great hack here is to get a freelancer on Upwork or Fiverr, give them precise instructions, tell them your niche. You can also ask them to give you editors' email addresses, domain authority scores, monthly audiences, social media followings. So you can start to filter out the publications with the most exposure. And again, you can get a list of 30 to 50 publications for around $30 from a freelancer. So that's a really good way to build up an instant list, which you can then go to step 2 with. So step 2 is develop a pitch. And in the next slide, I'll talk through an anatomy of a good pitch. But there's a few things you want to hit here. So it needs to be timely, needs to relate to kind of something in the market, something people are talking about, something that's coming up. It needs to have a clear hook. It needs to demonstrate the social proof of the person that's going to write the article, why they're qualified to talk about this, why they're an expert. And I'll break this down further on the next slide. And step 3 is outreach. So once you've got your pitch, you've got your list of targets from step 1. Again, it's simply a mail merge, putting this through your email account, sending it out to 20, 30 prospects in one go, and then managing any replies that you get. With a professional PR company, it can obviously varies widely between client, strength of the pitch, how topical it is. But to say, if you pitch to 25 publications, you might get a response rate of 1 or 2, which is very scalable, because it's no more work to pitch to 25 than it is to pitch to 5. So this is a good way to scale and to start getting some media wins. The next slide, Steve. So here we have kind of the anatomy of a recent pitch we did on behalf of MIT Enterprise Forum, just to kind of show you how we lay out the pitch, how we set our stall when we're approaching journalists. So the first one, at the top of the email, you want to set the scene. You want to show how this has some relevance to something that's topical. Of course, there's only one thing that's topical at the moment, as you can see in the pitch. Secondly, you then want to introduce yourself, or if you're doing it on behalf of someone else, introduce who it is you're speaking on behalf of, and just insert your voice at this point into the narrative. What is it that you think about this event? What is it that you disagree with about the conventional wisdom on this event that you're talking about? Set up there the contradiction that what it is you're providing is something of value and is maybe different than this, the narrative. Number 3, in this example here, to say explicitly what it is that you're offering. Too many pitches that go to journalists are very fluffy, and there isn't actually the definite, this is what I'm offering you. So you want to set up very quickly, based on what I've said above, and because I'm an expert on this subject, I would like to write an article about this, and provide the title of the article it is, you want to write, and then underneath a few bullet points of the points you're going to touch on in your article. And then number 4, that's where you really build and demonstrate your social proof. Have you had articles published in the past? If so, link to them. Have you founded a few companies in the past? Have you got a lot of experience in this industry? If so, state that fact there. Whatever your social proof is, whatever qualifies you as an expert on this subject, you want to put it in a couple of lines at the end of the email, so journalists know that you're legit. And then at the end, just to clarify again, your offer. You're offering a guest post and the time in which you can turn that around. So in summary, when it comes to guest posting, keep it short, link to current events, and show your social proof. So technique number 3, and this is responding to journalist requests. So press releases and guest post pitches, they're both outbound activities. This, when it comes to PR, is kind of the main inbound activity that there is. And again, it's a tactic that's used heavily throughout the PR industry. Next slide, Steve. So the main platform that people in PR and just business owners use to do this is called Harrow, or it stands for Help a Reporter Out. Their basic package is free to sign up for. Once you sign up, you get free emails a day, and the emails just have a very long list of all the sources that journalists are looking for through that platform. So if you get free emails a day, in any one day, you might get 600-700 requests in your inbox. They're categorized by industry, which makes it easy to go through. But when most people are sorting through this, they just open the email, search for the keyword of their industry, and see if there's anything in there. Next slide. And this looks like this. So managing it day to day can be a bit tricky, particularly for a lot of sort of startup founders, small businesses. So another option is you can get the next tier up. You can pay for a subscription, which is $19 a month. You can set up a keyword alert. So the platform will tell you if anyone is requesting something that's specific to the keyword that is related to your industry. And you also have a searchable database that you can just search once a day of your keyword to see if any journalists are looking from sources that's about your industry, about your products. And the requests can vary widely. Sometimes journalists and bloggers are interested in product reviews. Other times they just want an expert source for a specific news story that's breaking that day. But when it comes to this as well, time is crucial. Many journalists will want a response within that day, within 24 hours, particularly if it's something to do with a breaking news story. So this is the kind of tactic that you need to set. Make sure you have the time to respond to this. Maybe 10-15 minutes a day, 10-15 minutes every other day, if you want to do this and scale. Next slide, Steve. So the next technique, number 4, is media monitoring and relationship building. Again, this can lead to some good quality media coverage. It takes a little bit of work to set up and get going, but once you get into the flow of it, it can be an effective means to keep winning coverage and to keep winning coverage from the same pool of journalists that you build up that relationship with. So the next slide. So there are plenty of free tools and paid for tools out there that can provide media monitoring for you. The very basic level, you got tools like Google Alerts, where they'll just send you an email every day with the keywords that you want them to track with anything that goes into Google News that day. Talkwalker Alerts, similar to Google News, but it also includes Twitter feed monitoring as well. And then at the other end, you've got much more advanced platforms that have been released recently. So Feedly is a good example where you can set up feeds based on your industry, based on keywords that you're interested in, based on topics. And then they have AI that kind of learns what it is you're interested in and then starts refining the feed so you have a much kind of purer feed of stories that are just relevant to you. So once you've set up your media monitoring, you then get a good feel for the stories that are coming out each day, something you could look at every few days, maybe if you don't have the time, once a week. That then enables you to go on to the next step, which is relationship building. And so the next slide, please. So a way you'd want to do this, and again, it takes a bit of time, but it is scalable with some shortcuts. So whenever a journalist writes a story that's particularly relevant to your business, particularly relevant to your products, you can demonstrate particular expertise on it. You want to send them a quick canned response email, something like the email above, where there's just a couple of fields where you want to insert something that's specific to what it is that journalist written, and then send it off. So again, if you don't have much time, this might be something you do once a week. Towards the end of the week, looking at the stories that have come out that week. If there's maybe, depending on your industry, 5-10 relevant stories, then with a canned response like this, it's going to take you 30 minutes. It's not going to take a huge amount of time to do this. And it's a numbers game. So you're not going to hear back from every journalist that you send this to. You start scaling and sending enough of these out using these canned responses. You're going to get a response rate. You're going to get people just thanking you for the emails. You're going to get people that are going to take you up on your offer of providing an expert source. Or you're going to be in people's minds when there's another story breaking or another relevant article about that topic. There's then a good chance that they're going to come to you and request an expert comment from you or use you as a source because you're already in their address book. You're somebody, a go-to person for that topic. Next slide. So the final technique, which is cold pitching. So this is quite formless compared to techniques such as press releases or guest posting. So really, they can be about anything. But some of the most common cold pitches are when people are reaching out to journalists because there's something breaking in the industry and they're offering themselves an expert comment or an expert opinion on the topic. Or often, startups will try and do this to get their products reviewed, sending it to journalists that they think are going to be interested in their products. So if we go on to the next slide, there's just a couple of do's and don'ts. So again, build an angle. As with anything you're pitching out, press release, guest post, cold pitch, build an angle. It has to matter. It has to have a reason of interest to the journalist and the journalist audience. So a few ways you can do this here is provide a fresh perspective. So the media love reporting on a trending topic. By providing a fresh perspective, you'll stand out by offering something new. Can you provide new insight? Do you have user data that's providing a startling insight on an established topic? Can you tell the other side of the story? Can you provide a counter-argument to the prevailing narrative on a popular topic, backed by data or results or experience? Can what you're saying challenge the orthodoxy? Can it upend conventional wisdom or kill a sacred cow? Breaking new grounds, particularly with data companies. Can you present data or research results on a niche area in your industry that shines light on something that hasn't been reported before? And even if you're just pitching your product to try and get it reviewed, you still need to build out a solid angle that demonstrates why it matters. As remember, a journalist's job is to write stories, not to advertise products. So that's the end of the slide deck. So I'll open up to Katja if there are any questions you want me to answer.
Don't see any chat questions yet, but I'm going to give everybody a minute to chat in your questions for Rudi. Feel free to ask them here, but I'm actually going to ask one to start off. In terms of how much should a startup budget, would you say, for PR?
Like over the year or
over a year? Yeah. If they're just starting out, what do you think is a reasonable budget? And time, because the CEO, as we all know, is wearing many different hats, and they're going to have to put their PR hat on. So how much time? Time is money. So I guess time plus sort of cash in terms of, if you're going to Fiverr and things like that, do you think is a reasonable amount to start to get somewhere?
Okay. Really good question. So I think on the time question, I think you're right. If it's a CEO trying to do this, then it's going to be really challenging. and they're probably only going to have the time to maybe put out a press release when there's something major, or maybe like a guest post pitch if something kind of lands on their lap, which they're an absolute expert on and really have something to say. So that's where it's kind of difficult for startups. But if the business has someone already in house that's just doing marketing, that frees up a bit more resource for them to focus on this. So for me, when it comes to getting the balance right between budgets for different channels of marketing and PR, particularly in the early stages, I think investing in PR is where a lot of the priorities should be. Your product before you're trying to build a user base, you want to start winning media coverage to build your credibility, to build your exposure, to build links and referral traffic coming into your website long before you spend any money on like digital ads, social media ads, SEO content, because you want to build up those foundations that PR gives any business. So in terms of budget, it really depends. If you've got someone in house, depending on what they're doing, you'd almost want to allocate 10-20% of their time just focusing on PR to begin with, to build those foundations. If the business doesn't have a marketing person in house, then there are lots of options out there, including our own agency, that can provide PR for much lower price points than even 5 years ago. So an average PR package now, if you went into the market for a startup at the lower end, would be something around $500 to $700 a month. So it's really, the price barrier has crashed in the last 5 years of all of these new PR agencies that come out there and really disrupted the industries. Whereas in the past, to get into PR, you're probably looking at like a $5,000 a month retainer. But now it's way more affordable. But if a startup wants to go into it, they would only need to allocate at the bottom end probably $500-600 a month, and an agency can do a lot of that work for them.
Great. There's a bunch of questions that come in, so I'm going to start from the most recent, and then I'll work my way back up. Are publications like TechCrunch and the Next Web interested in guest post pitches from someone who hasn't had any articles published in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely more difficult to start pitching to top tier publications like that if the person that's pitching, can't demonstrate that social proof, can't point to other articles they've had published when they're pitching out in an email. So the recommendation we usually make to clients is start a bit smaller to build up your credibility. So start off with publications that are kind of specific to your niche, that, for want of a better phrase, have lower standards when it comes to the pitches that they accept. Start getting a few pitches published in those publications. Once you build up 4 or 5, you've then got this footprint. You're then growing the social proof. You can then start approaching publications like TechCrunch or the Next Web to try and get published in.
What about your own blog? I'm just going to add my own question on there. Does that build up credibility at all?
It shows your ability as a writer, which is also important for a publication like TechCrunch, or Next Level Forbes. They have very high editorial standards. So part of their selection process is they want to be certain you can actually write a good article. So yeah, things like your own blog, even better generally if you publish some stuff on your LinkedIn, or if you've got a Medium and you're publishing some stuff on Medium as well, that can be a good way to do it. But still, it does help to get some kind of lower tier media wins in first as well before approaching those publications.
Okay. I have a question here about being misquoted or taken out of context. How do you deal with that with the press?
Yeah, that's the inherent problem of PR. So some of that can be managed by a PR agency. Part of a PR agency's role is not just pitching; it's also media relationship management. But I mean, ultimately, it's the risk you take when it comes to paid media. You have complete control of your narrative. When it comes to PR, it's earned media, and you're kind of at the mercy of what it is that journalists are publishing. A way to kind of hedge against that, if you are particularly or you need to have a lot of control of your brands, is to focus more on the like building journalist relationship side of PR, where rather than just going out cold pitching, where you can then be taken out of context, spend a bit of time building relationships with a journalist using, I think, technique 4 that we showed in the slideshow. And that gives you more of an ability to kind of have an off the record chat with a journalist as you're providing the source or your quote or your opinion, so they have like a better idea of what it is you're trying to get across. And there's then much less chance they're going to misquote you or misrepresent what it is that you've said.
Okay. This is an interesting one. How do you handle it when you're trying to introduce something that few people have heard of? So a lot of our technologists are working on very novel things. So having to explain the science takes up a lot of time, basically. So how do you kind of handle that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of pitching is educating the journalist. So part of the way you would do that with a pitch is the angle that you're building out. So make it clear in your pitch, like what your product is and the problem it is that you're solving. So in your pitch, you want to point out to a few data points or a few references that sets the scene. There's this problem in this industry. There's this issue that people have with this thing. Here are some data points from reputable websites that confirm what I'm saying. And then, but we've now created this product or this solution that solves this problem for people. So if you can build out that real world example and demonstrate the application and the value of like what it is that you're pitching, if it's a very complex niche product, that can help educate the reader, educate the journalist, and of course, make them understand why it's relevant as well.
Also helps with your pitch when you're pitching to investors, I would say too.
That as well, yeah.
Yeah. So this might go back to what I asked first, but is it worth paying for press release distribution if really as an entrepreneur, you don't have the time to send it out manually?
If you're looking at a platform that's $1,000 and you're kind of bootstrapping PR and you're bootstrapping marketing, then I would say don't. There's far better ways you can spend $1,000 than putting a press release on a press release distribution platform. Just putting it on the platform is no guarantee that it's going to get picked up in the publications you want it to get picked up on. If you really don't have any time or resource to do the steps outlined here, and there's no one else in your business as well that can do that, then but you absolutely want to get it out because it's you've signed a huge agreement with a massive legacy company like General Motors or something like that. Then look for a good value distribution platform to shop around a bit. Don't just use the first one you find on Google. There are some platforms that can do it for like $200 to $300. So that could be a good middle ground if there's something really newsworthy to get out, but you don't have the time to approach publications separately.
This question is around social media, actually. So it's a little, how much should startups invest in a strong social media presence? And I'll just add to that sort of, as you're thinking about sort of PR, how do you weigh how to spend your dollars?
Yeah. So to a degree, it depends on the company. So if it's a B2B company, and like a lot of your new client acquisition is going to be through maybe business development rather than like B2B marketing, then there's a lot less reason to invest in social media. If you're launching something that is B2C, if you're going to be onboarding quantity rather than quality of users, then clearly social media is important. But I think kind of going back to I think the answer I gave in the first question in terms of like when do you start all of this, when do you start building all of this? PR is something that you should start building before you go to market, before you launch, when you've just founded your company, to start building credibility and to start building some awareness of who you are and what your place is in the industry. Whereas something like social media or other marketing channels like paid marketing, SEO, that stuff you want to invest in later down the line as you get towards or at your product launch. So I think it's more a matter of phasing rather than priorities. With phasing, you want to get PR investment started to begin with. Once you get that off the ground, you then want to start phasing in the other actions that are kind of more immediate once you go to market.
What is the impact comparison of PR to getting endorsement of a couple social media influencers?
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that or thought about that before. Again, I guess it depends on who you are, what your product is, and what your objectives are. So let's say you've just launched, or you've just raised some seed capital. You're gearing up for an investment round. If you're gearing up for an investment round, you're less interested in getting a social media influencer to endorse you if your product isn't even live yet. That seems a bit odd, but you'll be much more interested in getting yourself featured in Forbes or Entrepreneur, where you're providing your expertise on a subject in the market. That's going to provide far more credibility to a potential investor than what is usually quite obviously a paid for social media endorsement. Whereas if you've gone to market, your product's out there, and it's a B2C app, something like that, then that would probably be far more useful to get a social media endorsement versus more traditional PR wins. So it kind of depends on where you're at in the lifespan of your business, what your priorities are at that moment, and what it is your product is, what it is you do.
Right. Who should approach the media? Is it the CEO, the CSO, the group together? How should it work?
There is no, in my mind, best practice to that. The CEO is just as valuable, I think, as any other C-suite member, or if you've got a marketing person as well, or if you're outsourcing it to a freelancer or an agency. Really, anyone can do it. It's the strength of the pitch and what you're saying in the pitch versus who the pitch is coming from. That is the important thing.
This is another question by me, but how about sort of coaching when you do get an interview? How do you suggest people practice, or
Yeah.
things like that?
So again, really good. I mean, it's amazing what the psychology of the moment does to you when you first get on the phone call with a journalist, and it's the first time you've won some big media coverage for your business. People can get a little bit flustered or can not quite get across the salient points they wanted to get across before the call. So most PR companies will offer media training when it comes to prepping someone if they've landed a phone interview with a journalist. If you're not using the resource for PR agency, the best way to do that is get someone else you're working for, or a friend or a family member, just to give you, phone you up literally in another location, so you're on an actual phone call, and just have them ask you a few questions that are typical questions that a journalist is going to ask. What it is you do, why now, why is it important? So you can just rehearse getting across what it is that you're trying to say, and just practicing that for 15, 20 minutes before you actually have a call can make a big difference.
What about sort of alternative, I'll say alternative things like podcasting and things like that? Are those other areas that people should look into, popular podcasts, and is the pitching any different there?
Yeah, 100%. So that would kind of fall under cold pitching, where you're sending out a pitch to a big list that you've harvested either from a freelancer or yourself, and you're offering some value. So 100%. And actually, I was supposed to mention that in the cold pitching slide. So that is becoming.
And I didn't even know that. So hey, look at that! Look at us.
Thanks for reminding me. Yeah. So absolutely. But it comes down to the same fundamentals of showing the value you can bring, the social proof of why it is you're an expertise, and why it matters now. But if you do the same approach with podcasters versus journalists, numbers game, send it out to 30 podcasters, you might get one or two results. You can then start building relationships that way.
Right. We have a question here about getting media coverage about a product specifically. I think you covered a little bit about, don't pitch your product. But if you can go back to maybe just that slide, talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So yeah, Steve's going through the slides.
There
Okay.
you go. Golden rule number two.
Golden rule number two, guys. Yeah. So we say this to, I guess, manage expectations with clients. Like typically when a client first comes into any PR agency, they're super excited that they want every pitch to be about their great products, and they want to get all of these influential news outlets talking about their product to be the next best thing. Unfortunately, that's rarely the case. A lot of the media coverage that PR agencies or do-it-yourself PR will win, it's not about your product, but it's still valuable. Saying that, there are still ways, and plenty of businesses still get a lot of media coverage um, about their product. So clearly, press releases, when you have something to say that's newsworthy, or you're releasing a massive new product, if you signed a big partnership with a huge tech company, a huge legacy company, those things are of interest to news outlets in your industry. That's a way you can get people talking about your products, news coverage about your products. And if you just want a review, like on say TechCrunch or the Next Web, you've just built an app and it's going to take over Tinder, for example. It's going to be the next big dating app. Um, those types of products, that's when they just want this media coverage, and that's when kind of cold pitching comes in to pitch out to these publications. But the kind of the problem is it needs, there are obviously so many new products coming onto the market all the time. Like the acceptance rate of pitch to getting just a feature about your product in somewhere like TechCrunch would be in the thousands to one. It comes down to the strength of your product. Is what you have produced, is what you're launching, and at this moment in time, does it kind of tick those boxes? And it's almost out of your control. You can write the best pitch possible. If it doesn't hit those points, then it's not going to pass the gatekeepers of the journalists.
Great. I think those are all the questions I see, and we are right on time. So I just want to say thank you, Rudi. We really appreciate the partnership we have with you. I've gotten a lot of this was great. So
That's good.
thank you very much. I do want, for those of you still on the line, just to mention our next online event is on Friday. It's our Startup Spotlight event, where we'll feature 4 new startups this week pitching. So please join us for that. But otherwise, Rudi will share Rudi's slides, and he's available on his email as well for further questions. But thank you, Rudi. We really appreciate it, and we will see you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Kasia. Thanks again for inviting me on, and thanks everyone for attending.